starts off with a promise. What does John promise us? I am not going to say anything that I didn't see and hear myself. I will only tell you what I have seen and what I have heard. First person testimony. Yeah. The most powerful testimony. Does any other book say that? No. Luke. Did Luke even meet Jesus? Did he ever see Jesus?
No. He was how many years after?
Well, it would have been several, because he was actually saved during Paul's second missionary journey. Okay?
Yeah.
So it came along quite a little bit later. So John says, I'm only going to tell you what I've seen and what I've heard. And then I'm going to give you every kind of proof so that you can know for sure. All the way through his 3 letters, he says the same thing, so that you can know for sure, so that you can be absolutely certain, so that you don't have to have any questions. I'm going to give you everything you need to be able to believe in this man they call Jesus. Okay? And one of the things that he did was to give us 7 proofs. Okay, we got through a few of them last time. We're going to finish those off today. And he's got a book of 7s. All right? There are 7 different phrases that says, I am. Jesus' words say, I am. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. And I am the vine. Those are the 7 things he says, that where he claims, this is who I am. Why is 7 important?
Perfect number.
It's the perfect number. How long did it take God to create the world, for one thing?
7 days.
7 days. Okay? And so, if you want to complete a project, you do it in 7 stages. If you want to prove something, you prove it with getting 7 proofs. Jesus said, I am these 7 different ways of describing who he was. He also gives us, the Gospel of John gives us 7 different proofs. And you remember what the first one was? Comes in the 2nd chapter of John. 2nd chapter of John. On the 3rd day there was a wedding that took place in Cana in Galilee. He changed the water into wine. All right? Each one of these things is something so completely unexpected and so incredible that it's never been done before, and it's never been done since. Each one of these stands alone. This is part of the reason why John, you'll hear people say, or you can't believe what John says, because a lot of that stuff is just beyond belief. All right, you can't believe that.
What proof did you say that one was?
What was that?
What proof did you say that one was?
Proof 1 is chapter 2.
Oh, that's right.
Chapter verse.
Sorry.
Chapter 2.
I
verse
heard
1.
proof 2, not chapter 2.
Yeah.
So I got confused.
Chapter 2, and I probably said it wrong. All right, and all those materials are in the back. You'll find them kind of at the back of your book. There, Pepe. Yeah. All of the Bible study materials we're doing right now are in that group of about 3 or 4 pages. Hey, Jonathan, come on in.
New shoes?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first miraculous sign happens in the 2nd chapter of John, verse 1, on the 3rd day. So if you've got your notes out, if you've got that out, kind of mark that. That's your first miraculous sign. And we said each one of these miraculous signs is superior to the miracle that Moses would have done during the Exodus. All right? So why is Jesus' miracle of turning wine from water into wine, why is that superior to Moses' miracle? Remember why he said Moses is going to testify that I am the Messiah. Moses is going to tell you that I am more powerful than he is. So each one of the miracles is going to be more powerful than one that Moses did. You remember why this isn't as superior to Moses?
Why this is superior to Moses?
Mm-hmm. The people were thirsty. There was no water. God said, I'll provide water if you go up to that big rock and you strike it with your walking stick.
Does you speak to it?
That's the other one.
That's the second one.
That's the second one, yeah.
Second one. And so Moses goes over, puts his walking stick on the rock, and out of the rock springs water. In the first miraculous sign, what did they fill to the brim?
Stone.
Stone jars.
Yeah.
Okay? And so they filled the stone jars up to the brim with water. Remember, they did put a little wine in sometimes just for protection from infection. But there was no room for any wine in this because they were filled clear to the brim. And when they dip out of the stone and they take it to the master of the wedding, it is wine. So it's wine out of the stone instead of water out of the stone.
That's great. That's why
Okay.
it was better.
So that's the first miraculous sign. The second miraculous sign, come over here, comes in chapter 4, verse 43. A man comes to Jesus whose son is sick, far away, maybe even as much as a 2-day journey away, and said, my son is very near death. And Jesus said, I will heal your son. The man turns around and heads back home. About halfway, he's met by people from his home. And what do they tell him?
His son's healed.
At the very moment that Jesus spoke the words,
And that meeting halfway is proof of that.
mm-hmm. And so, what does that confirm? What does that prove as one of the miraculous signs about Jesus? He's a real good healer? What was that?
He's the commander in chief.
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. He orders the entire angelic host completely under his command. Here, go do this. And they do it. Instantly it's done. Okay? And so that's the second miraculous sign. And the third miraculous sign comes in chapter 5. And it's a man who's been invalid for 38 years. And he's very, very famous. And he is extremely well known because everybody who came to the festivals, it was one of their traditions, that they had to go by the places where the beggars stayed and the invalids were, and they would give gifts to those who were in need before they went into the temple. It was an act of compassion to take care of those who were in trouble. Okay? And so Jesus walks up to the man who was sick 38 years and says, what's the main question here? Do you want to be healed? And at the pool of healing, why wouldn't I want to be healed? Right? Then stand up and walk. And he walked out, picked up his robe, and went home. Third miraculous sign. Remember what the conclusion was? Jesus found him in the temple, and he said, be careful and stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. Now, just speculating now, what do you think his sin was? Laying by the pool. How sinful could he be? Come on. He certainly wasn't a thief. He couldn't run away.
Anger towards
It was
God.
in his thoughts. It could have been his pride. Could have been his ego. It could be greed. Why would a guy who's been laying by the pool may be greedy?
Because he can be given gifts there and everything, so he stays there.
he could have been the wealthiest beggar ever found in the entire world. And his flow of income has been cut off. Isn't that interesting? You wouldn't think about a guy laying by a pool being wealthy, but he just might have been. And he certainly was completely self-absorbed. Oh, poor me. Oh yeah, it's not fun being sick for 38 years. But maybe you brought part of it on yourself. Maybe. And so Jesus had a point. He said, I am here to make the impossible happen. But I expect people to understand and respond and do things differently. The third miraculous sign, very interesting, healing at the pool. Many of the rest of his healings, people asked him to be healed. Did the man in the pool ask to be healed? No. Sometimes God just does his thing, and we think, oh man, is that cool? Or what? This is amazing. Okay, fourth miraculous sign is in chapter 6. Jesus feeds the 5,000. All right, that's really cool because, again, another one of those miraculous miracles that's superior to Moses, because Moses prayed and manna was given in the desert and quail flew by close to the ground, and you could use a stick and knock down a quail and have lunch along with your manna. But Jesus feeds 5,000 people so that everybody is satisfied, and even 12 baskets left over beyond. How much was left over after you had your manna? Nada. You weren't allowed to take any extra. If you didn't eat it that day, it rotted and it stunk. So each one of these miracles is recorded as being superior to Moses. Okay? So that's number 4. This is the one we ended on last time. So we're doing kind of a review. Number 5 comes from the same chapter, but it's verse 16. The disciples, leaving without Jesus, go halfway across the Sea of Galilee. Now I'm going to tell you, the Sea of Galilee has disappeared. The entire Jordan Valley has been washed away, and even the Dead Sea no longer exists because we had a 1,000-year storm and water came through the roof and washed away the entire Jordan Valley. Okay?
Now that would be terrifying if that was real.
And I like my little drawing so much. Anyway, so Jesus,
In the flood stage.
Yep.
it was in all the news.
Didn't have civil engineers back then to design them.
It's safe and having to
Yeah.
dig all those channels from the Mediterranean
Exactly.
Sea. Sure, there you go. So they row out to the middle of the lake, 3.5 miles to almost dead center, and they can't go any farther. What's stopping them?
Storm.
The wind and the waves, because it, just like the hurricane came in today, the waves were pretty powerful.
In Panama City.
Yeah, which we were just in.
It's a little strange. Maybe it doesn't make any difference to you, but it's always interesting to me. Storms on the Sea of Galilee cause catastrophic waves very, very quickly. Now, the little boats that are on the Sea of Galilee don't have a gunwale. Not maybe. They only stick out of the water about so high. They don't have very much protection from heavy waves.
Yeah.
So they have a very low gunwale. And the reason they do that is because it's hard to work the nets over a big high banister rail. If you're throwing the nets out, it tends to just get in the way, dragging those nets up and over the big tall gunwale side of the boat. So they keep the sides of the boat low so they can work the nets over both sides of the boat. But it makes it very dangerous in a storm, and especially on the Sea of Galilee. Because the Sea of Galilee is in a rift valley. Remember how we talked about it being in a rift valley? It's really, really deep. And it sets completely surrounded by hills that have basically sunk into this sinkhole. So when the wind comes down the slopes of the mountainsides on all sides of the Sea of Galilee, it isn't blowing straight in a line. It's digging at the surface of the water as it gets to the shoreline and starts chopping the water almost immediately. The Sea of Galilee is one of those strange places that it can go from mirror-like quiet to just churned up like a whirlpool washer in just instantaneously because the wind comes at it from a different angle. Okay, so here they are. They're out 3.5 miles. What's the miraculous sign? Jesus comes out walking on the water. Is that the greatest part of this story?
Depends on
Depends on your
his
That's a good part, yeah.
Depends on your perspective. It's pretty spectacular that he comes walking out on the water.
But when he stopped the storms,
Didn't really say he stopped
It
the
was the
storm.
instantaneous.
oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Wrong thing.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
That was like the 3 and
So as soon as he steps in the boat, what happens?
They're at the
Again,
they're just at the shore.
they jump 3.5 miles and they're transported 3.5 miles to the place they were heading against the wind, against the waves. They're now where they were heading instantaneously. You see how this is superior to Moses and the Red Sea crossing? Why didn't God just do the same thing?
That would fall in.
We would have missed out on a great movie.
Yeah.
Destroy all the Egyptians that are running after them.
Yeah.
Well,
The
it's
physical proof wouldn't be there now either.
fine for Moses, it's fine for the people of Israel, but God's plan is to show that Jesus is superior in every way to Moses. And so that is the 5th miraculous sign. Now at this point, they've stopped numbering them. I have them written in my Bible in the margins because I go to them more than once a week or so, and I need to know just which one I'm talking about, so I put them in the margins. But let's just go to the 6th miraculous sign, or the 6th miraculous sign, okay? It happens, get my Bible open in the right spot here.
9.
I love my new Bible, but the pages still haven't gotten broken into my fingers yet, have they?
Oh, yeah.
Chapter 9, and it's the man who was born blind. And the disciples are walking along. They've got Jesus kind of doing his teaching along the route. They say to Jesus, who sinned that this man would be born blind? Was it him, or was it his parents that sinned, that caused this man to be born blind? The assumption is, if somebody hadn't sinned, this wouldn't have happened. This is a curse that comes from being sinful. Okay? And Jesus replied, nobody sinned. This was so that God could receive the glory. And he takes the man who has also not asked to be healed, because he has no concept of what it looks like to see. He's never seen anything. So it's sort of like asking someone who's been lame, do you want to walk? Well, yeah, in theory, I guess I do, but I can't even envision what that looks like or what it feels like.
Yeah.
So he takes the man, he spits on the ground and makes a little mud. And he puts the mud on the man's eyes and sends him to the pool of Siloam to wash. When he washes the mud away, places where there were no eyes now have fully functioning, healthy eyes. Has it ever been done before?
No.
Has it ever been done since? have we, with all of our magical medical procedures, ever done anything like this?
Making apples come out of nowhere? Nope.
Nor do they ever expect to. It just doesn't happen. And then there's a great story of the
In Acts.
investigation. What was that?
In Acts, isn't there Peter heals the blind, but
Yes.
there's one blind man.
But not one that is specific. This is the only one who says born blind.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why this is important, let's just talk about that, Jonathan, for a second. How do you know if a baby is blind or if it can see?
It's probably by the way its eyes look.
Not really. Babies'
Stare.
eyes don't work too good anyway. They don't have bifocal vision.
Uh-huh.
All right? And one eye can be looking in this way, and the other one eye looking that way, and it's very weird, all right? Because the brain has to coordinate the eyes over time to learn how to follow your finger and do all the things that you can tell that they can actually see. You can't see the quality of whether they can see or not, but you can tell that they can see something. I mean, a little flash of light and they wince or something like that. So how can you know whether or not they have real vision or not? This man, on the moment of his birth, was known he would never see. Now, how would that be possible?
Nothing bothered his eyes. He would never react to it. Like,
Yeah. There was something missing. I can't tell what the deformity might have been, but it was obvious just by looking in his face, this person will never have the capability of seeing. I called him the boy with the misshapen eyes. He was disfigured in some way and did not have the facility, the machinery, biological machinery, you want to call it that, to see. And it was just perfectly obvious to everybody. This is a boy who was born without eyes to see. Okay? Now, the reason why it's significant, why the question was asked, because syphilis was still a common disease even back in Jesus' day. If a child was born from a parent who had syphilis, the syphilis germ would get into the eyes themselves, and slowly over time, maybe in 6 or 8 or 10 months, something like that, it would cloud the cornea, and then they would not long be able to see. But you wouldn't know that that person was born with that germ, but you would eventually see that they became just completely clouded on their eyes so that you couldn't see the irises or anything, and you would know that they were blind. Well, there were a lot of blind people that were blind because somebody had sinned and because of sexually transmitted disease couldn't see. But this is a person who was born blind from the moment of birth. Okay, so that makes it very unique in the sense of the many, many people that were blind that were healed. This is one that stands out as a special miracle. And the investigation went back through. Are you the one who was born blind? Are you the one, is this the boy that was born blind when they bring his parents in? And they go through the whole investigation. And it was a perfect miracle. Everybody said, yes, this is the guy. Parents said, yes, this is the guy. How did it happen? You'll have to ask the guy because we don't know. All right? And so the miracle of the sixth miraculous sign stands out as this one that was extremely well documented and well investigated, partly because, remember now what we're talking about, so that we can be sure, we can be absolutely certain, we can know without any question. And so how does the writer of this gospel know what was said in all of those discussions and the investigation? Remember how he says, well, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And the man answered, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? And then they hurled insults at him. And you are this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. Well, isn't that remarkable? You don't know where this man comes from, yet he opened my eyes. And we know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. No one has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind, and if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And to this, the chief priests and the ones investigating say, you were steeped in sin at birth. We know that because you were blind. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Now, stop and ask yourself the question. How many of Jesus' disciples were in the room?
One.
John.
How do we know that?
Disciple, though.
John the priest.
How do we know that?
Because he doesn't say anything he wasn't there for.
Because he wouldn't put it in his book if he hadn't seen it and heard it. How many of the rest of the disciples were there? How about the 12?
No? They didn't have anyone
John,
there.
the priest, was not one of the 12. He never claims to be. I don't think he even really wants to be. He's got too many advantages being John the P.
Yeah.
Because he can be any place he needs to be to hear what's going on. They can be in the quarters of the investigation like nobody else that follows Jesus. And can tell us word for word who said what the argument was, and what the final result was.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting stuff, okay? And I hope you just stand here and go, this is unbelievable. At least, I do. All right. The seventh and final miraculous sign happens in John the 11th chapter, verse 38. Lazarus is dead for 4 days. He's a good friend of Jesus. Jesus comes to be with the sisters, Mary and Martha. They meet him outside of town, each one of them in turn, and says, Jesus, if you would have been here, our brother would not have died. And Jesus didn't even argue with them because they were right. But he does say to Mary, don't you know that I am the resurrection and the life? Oh yeah, yeah, I know that. Now take me to his tomb and remove the stone. No, that's not good. This is not a good thing. All right? It's been 4 days and he stinks. Bad. Bad. They remove the stone while there are thousands of witnesses. Now, how do we know there are thousands of witnesses?
Because John was there.
Well, John was certainly there, but it says that all the chief priests and all of the religious leaders came out of the temple, the 2 miles over to Bethany, to comfort the sisters. Lazarus was a godly man. The sisters were godly ladies. This was a family that was very highly respected in the entire Jerusalem community.
That's it.
And the entire leadership of Jerusalem came out to be with them in their time of grief. And this was a long period, like 7 days sitting Shiva. All right? It was a very long grieving process. And so the entire community was filled with mourners for Lazarus. It was a very noisy place, too. The traditions were managed perfectly. On the day that the person died, before sunset of that same day, he had to be put in the tomb. He had to be prepared. Everything was supposed to be done according to the traditions. Everything had been fulfilled. There had been witnesses from the time he got sick all the way through to the moment when Jesus arrived. There was no break or inconsistency. There was no time when there weren't people grieving at the tomb of Lazarus. You can't do a bait and switch here. Are you following all the things that could be argued of what was happening? This was a man who was deeply loved, who was mourned by everyone, especially with the suddenness of his loss. And they were hurting. Jesus walks to the tomb, has a very short prayer, and then commands, Lazarus, come out. And out of the tomb he walks, still wrapped in the grave clothes. Okay? Loose him and let him free. How is that greater than what Moses did? Why is this superior to Moses? What would be the most likely? What was the life and death miracle of Moses' time? The last plague of Egypt?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Okay? You put blood on the doorpost and on the lintel, and the death angel will walk past your house. If the blood's not on the door, he's going to take the life of the firstborn son. And every cattle and every flock and every field, everything, a firstborn male is going to be snuffed out on one night. Which is harder, to kill 10,000 or to resurrect one?
Resurrect one.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there have been a lot of executions. There have been a lot of people who had the power to put thousands to death in a single campaign, a single day. You read the Old Testament, it happened quite frequently. They just wipe out a whole people. All right? There is no indication there was ever a time when one came back from the dead.
Not Moses.
Okay.
Elijah and Elisha.
What was that?
Elijah and Elisha.
Didn't come back from the dead. He was actually taken up in a chariot of fire.
No, the
Oh,
widow's son.
the widow's son.
And then
Yes.
and Elisha, when he was in the tomb,
Mhm.
somebody fell on his bones and came back or was revived.
Yeah, but those are,
Yeah, I was listening wrong. I was going.
yeah,
Those are not as miraculous as Lazarus.
not 4 days in the tomb.
Yeah.
Let me just do this real fast because I think this is part of what I'm trying to get to. I want you to stand in awe of Jesus. And I want you to see that Jesus is the one who teaches us about everything that comes in the first part of the Bible and teaches us how to understand what comes in the last part of the Bible.
Yeah.
These stories of Jesus set in the middle, and he teaches us how to understand all the rest of it. How did God create the world in Genesis? You recall how it happened?
He said, let there be light. Yeah.
He spoke the word.
Except for us.
And it happened just like that. And he spoke the word, and the oceans receded and said, there's your limit, that's the boundary. And he spoke the word, and they were filled with life. He spoke the word, and vegetation grew. He spoke the word, and everything came into being by speaking the word. How many witnesses were there? Who can verify? No one. Then it can't be true, because if you don't have a witness or two, you can't say that it's true, right? You can't say that Adam saw it because he came even after that. So how do we know it happened?
Faith.
Oh yeah, oh definitely faith. But we have more assurance than that, because John says, I want you to know for sure. So how do we know for sure? Because Jesus stood in front of a tomb of a man that everybody knew him very, very well, knew that he had died, knew that every tiny little cell of his body had been completely destroyed by decay and was totally worthless. And by simply speaking the words, a new body was created, ex nihilo, from junk, nothing of value. And not only was a new body created, but Lazarus, in his spirit, was returned into that body with all of his memories, with all of his emotions, with all of his passions and the things that make him Lazarus, and walked out of the tomb. They had a dinner for him later that day. It was quite a party, I hear. Why did so many people come to the party?
Because the man they loved was
Wanted to see
back to
themselves.
life.
No.
Huh?
Well, yeah, they certainly were. What was
They
it?
wanted to see for themselves.
They had to find out if it was true.
Yeah.
You remember when he fell on the rock and put a big gash in his head? Is that scar still there? Does he still have that toe that crossed over and was all, because he mashed it so bad and it never did heal right? Is this exactly the same guy that I've known? Does he still love me as his best friend, or does he not remember me? Is this the guy who can say, there's only two people in the world who know who our first girlfriend was? Can you tell me who it was? Are you the same guy? What was
Your
that?
first girlfriend?
No, they're asking Lazarus
Oh.
for things that private information only he could know. They're checking him out. Is this the very same guy? Does he have the same birthmark? Does he have the same everything exactly as he was? If God made the most complex and the most difficult element of the entire creation, he could do it on the spot by simply speaking the words in front of witnesses. That proves that Genesis 1 is correct. You follow how Jesus teaches us how to understand Now I'm going to ask you a tougher question, all right? And this isn't in John. If he made a beat up, battered up, scarred up, gap-toothed body for Lazarus, could he create a world that had so many complexities to it that it looks for all the world like it was there for billions and billions of years before creation, buried all kinds of bones, buried all kinds of evidence, all kinds of things, and done it in an instant? Just ask yourself that. If Lazarus was an old guy, and he certainly was, and he had all the indications of being an old guy, and if he created a brand new 18-year-old version of Lazarus, it wouldn't look too good, would it? You wouldn't have proved anything.
Not really, no.
Okay? So he had to make a perfect body for Lazarus. He had to bring back the exact person of Lazarus with no gaps. Now, work back to the Genesis experience. Could he have made the complexity of a world so incredible that it would take our finest scientists all of these decades to research and figure out and to think and reason how it could have happened this way and still have been made by simply calling it into existence? Which is easier, to make every organism that populates the entire earth in a microsecond, or to bury a bunch of fossil bones in a mountain when you create it? Which is tougher?
Prior.
You see, I love science, and I love because there isn't any other mechanism we've got to try and figure out how things work. But I never, ever think that the master of all things has to live by the rules of science. The engineer creates the rules, he doesn't live by the rules. He creates the system, he doesn't put himself in bondage to the system because he's the one who set the rules up in the first place. Never let anybody tell you that just because God made a world that has fairly strict limits of what happens and what doesn't happen, don't let them tell you that that somehow limits him and his ability to make things happen that he wants to happen. Now, I'm going to stop there because I know there's going to be a question about that. I know it, right? Yeah?
I have a question, but it's,
A question, shoot.
try and track with me here, 'cause my brain works.
Okay.
Number 3 and number 6.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, you said he was like that for 38 years. Are we assuming that he was or was not born that way?
No, he was not born that way.
Okay, if he was, could it be equated to being as the same as number 6 since they're both miracles of Jesus?
You
If
can.
he was born that way and he was creating new ligaments, new nerves, new tendons, new joints, new muscles, isn't that the same as making new eyes if he was born that way and they would basically be paired together as the
They
same
could be
miracle?
paired. I will let you pair those two together if that makes
Well,
sense to you.
well,
No,
if
I'm
he
just
wasn't
saying.
born that way, then I don't have to worry about that. But I was just kind of curious, if he had been, would there be 6 miracles instead of 7?
My sense of it is that this is a guy who created a situation he was living in,
Right.
rather than the blind man who did not create his
Okay,
situation.
that answers my
And that's the way I
I
would
was
phrase that.
looking at that and I was like, well, if it had been that way, then I know we're comparing Moses and Jesus, but it would technically be similar because he's creating new instruments to be used in
He
the
does.
so.
And he really is.
But since
I
the,
guess I would say I would like to see the two, because there are many instances where Jesus took a withered hand that was completely
Right.
unusable and instantly created a whole hand, or someone who was lame and was given the ability to walk. It's interesting question, but he didn't tell the blind man, stop sinning.
right, that's the one
Yeah,
big
that's the
key difference
one
between the two.
differentiating point. And I have a feeling that the man born blind became a dedicated follower of Jesus. I'm not sure the guy who was healed after 38 years did.
I'm curious what he did with the wealth that he had, if he like gave it to the rest of the people that were waiting at the pool, or if he did something with it, or
He became a pain handler.
right, like he could have done anything with it, but I'm curious what he actually did with the money and stuff that he received.
Well, let's just say it this way. He went immediately to the chief priest and ran it out on Jesus. That does not
Rat
bode
it out,
well.
like as in like he's like, oh man, this guy.
This is the guy. This is the guy.
But not look what happened. This is the guy that did it. He wasn't boasting about him. He was trying to get him in trouble.
I think.
Huh?
Went to the chief priest and said, this is the one who did it.
He ruined all this.
And the reason why is that important? Because they were angry with the healer
Right.
because it was done on the Sabbath. He could have kept it to himself, but
He probably thought that they could, if he could give them something to work off of, maybe they would pay him for it, or maybe he could get something out of it.
I think you're probably right.
Still greedy.
I think he's still greedy.
Still greedy.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
I think he's still self-absorbed. Okay, now, I want to just go backwards to a second, and I'll take any kind of questions and that kind of stuff. This is extremely important. The miracle of Lazarus was so perfect, so absolutely perfect, that almost immediately the chief priests and the rulers of the temple started plotting to kill Lazarus as well as kill Jesus. Because there was no way that if Lazarus stayed alive, that they could attack Jesus because the miracle was too perfect. Just too perfect.